When Aaron and Jack bought the Victorian house at the edge of town, they'd laughed at the warnings from locals. "That place has a history," their realtor had said with a nervous chuckle. Aaron had shrugged it off. Every old house had stories, and they were practical people, not the superstitious type. The house needed work, of course, peeling wallpaper, creaking floors, and drafty windows, but they were prepared. The charm of its ornate woodwork, towering ceilings, and stained glass windows was enough to outweigh any creepy legends. Or so they thought. One chilly afternoon, a month into the renovations, Aaron was clearing out the attic. The space was cluttered with decades of dust-covered furniture and forgotten belongings. She wiped her brow, the dim light filtering through the small circular window catching motes of dust in the air. Then she noticed it. At the far end of the attic, hidden behind an old armoire, was a wall that didn't match the rest. The planks were newer, less weathered, and nailed together hastily. Her heart quickened with curiosity. "Jack," she called down the creaky staircase. "Come up here. You've got to see this." Jack arrived, wiping paint from his hands, and frowned at the wall. "What do you think it is?" Aaron shrugged. "Only one way to find out." They grabbed tools and began prying at the boards. With each nail they removed, Aaron felt her excitement morph into unease. The air in the attic seemed to grow colder, heavier, as if the house itself were holding its breath. When the last plank came loose, the couple stepped back to reveal a door. It was small, painted white, with a tarnished brass knob. Jack tried to twist it, but it wouldn't budge. "Sealed shut," he muttered, reaching for a crowbar. As he pried the door open, a strange, sweet smell wafted out, like old roses mixed with decay. Aaron covered her nose as Jack pushed the door inward. Inside was a room frozen in time. It was a child's bedroom, perfectly preserved. A tiny four-poster bed with a lace canopy sat against the wall, its quilted blanket undisturbed. A wooden rocking horse stood in the corner, and shelves lined with porcelain dolls smiled eerily in the dim light. The wallpaper was pale pink, adorned with faded patterns of stars and moons. Aaron's unease deepened as her eyes landed on a small desk against the far wall. On it sat a stack of papers, yellowed with age. "Jack, look at this," she whispered, moving toward the desk. The papers were notes, written in a spidery, childlike scrawl. "Do not disturb what lies beneath. Keep the floor sealed. It's safer this way. If you hear her, don't answer." Jack peered over her shoulder, his face pale. "What is this? Some kind of prank?" "I don't think so," Aaron said, her voice unsteady. She ran her fingers over the papers, noticing something else, indentations in the desk. Deep, jagged scratches, as though someone had clawed at the wood. A sudden thud echoed from beneath the floor. Both of them froze, their eyes meeting. "Did you hear that?" Aaron whispered. Another thud. Then the faintest sound, a child's laugh, high-pitched and hollow, coming from somewhere below. Jack stepped back. "We're sealing this room back up. Right now." But before he could move, the floorboards beneath the bed creaked violently, as if something was shifting underneath. Aaron grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. "Jack, what lies beneath?" Neither of them had an answer. But deep down, they both knew they'd made a mistake. Aaron barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the room, the tiny bed, the grinning porcelain dolls, the ominous notes. She kept hearing the faint, echoing sound of that child's laugh, though she couldn't be sure if it was real or just her imagination. Jack, for his part, was resolute. "We'll board it back up tomorrow," he said, his voice firm but his hands trembling slightly. "Whatever that was, we don't need to mess with it." But the house had other plans. The next morning, Aaron went to make coffee, only to find the power out. The lights wouldn't turn on, the appliances were dead, and their phones refused to charge. "It's probably just old wiring," Jack said, trying to sound confident as he rummaged through the toolbox. "I'll check the breaker box." As he headed to the basement, Erin stayed in the kitchen, lighting a few candles for warmth. She was pouring a glass of water when she heard it, a faint scraping sound, coming from above her. Her breath hitched. The attic. The sound grew louder, more deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. "Jack?" she called, her voice wavering. No answer. She grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the stairs, every creak of the floorboards making her flinch. As she climbed, the sound shifted. Now it wasn't just scraping, it was footsteps, light and uneven, pacing back and forth. When she reached the attic door, she hesitated. The air felt colder, the space beyond the door heavier, as though the room itself were waiting for her. She pushed the door open. The attic was empty, the boarded-up wall still exposed, the small door to the child's room ajar. "No," she whispered, stepping closer. She was certain they had closed it last night. The room looked the same as before, still frozen in eerie perfection. But something was different. The bed. Its quilt, untouched yesterday, was now rumpled, as if someone had sat on it, or lain there. "Jack!" Erin shouted, backing away from the room. She turned and nearly collided with him. "What is it?" he asked, alarmed. She pointed toward the room, her voice shaking. "The bed. Someone's been in there." Jack frowned and stepped forward, shining his flashlight inside. The beam swept over the room, but nothing moved. He glanced at Erin, his expression uncertain. "It's probably just our nerves. Maybe we didn't notice it last night." "No," Erin insisted. "I know what I saw." Before Jack could respond, a loud bang reverberated from beneath their feet. It was followed by a series of rhythmic knocks, slow and deliberate, traveling across the floorboards. The sound wasn't random. It was deliberate. Intentional. "It's coming from below," Jack whispered. "Below." Erin's voice was barely audible. The knocking stopped, replaced by an agonizing silence. Then, a soft voice drifted up from the shadows below, faint but unmistakable. "Why did you open the door?" Jack grabbed Erin's arm, pulling her toward the attic stairs. "We're getting out of here," he said, his voice low and urgent. But as they descended, the air grew colder. The house seemed to twist around them, the walls narrowing, the stairs creaking louder than they ever had before. When they reached the bottom, they froze. The basement door stood wide open, though neither of them had touched it. A faint glow emanated from the darkness below, pulsating like a heartbeat. "Jack," Erin whispered, clutching his arm. "What's happening to our house?" Jack swallowed hard, unable to answer. And then came the laugh, the same hollow, childlike giggle they'd heard in the attic. Only now, it was closer. Much closer. Jack slammed the basement door shut and locked it. His hands shook as he turned to Erin. "We're leaving. Now." Erin nodded, her breathing shallow. The laughter still echoed in her ears, like it had followed them from the attic. She grabbed her coat, but as she moved toward the front door, the house resisted. The walls groaned, the air pressing down like a physical force. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching unnaturally long. Jack reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. He yanked and kicked at the door, but it stayed shut, as if welded in place. "It's not letting us leave," Erin whispered, her voice trembling. Jack turned to her, his face pale. "What do you mean, it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced toward the stairs leading back up to the attic. The small door to the sealed room was closed again, but something about it seemed different now, like it was watching them. "Whatever's here," she said finally, "it's coming from that room. From the floor." Despite every instinct telling them to run, they headed back to the attic. The oppressive air followed them, growing heavier with each step. When they reached the small door, Jack hesitated, gripping the crowbar he'd brought with him. "This is insane," he muttered, but he knelt down and pried the door open again. The room looked the same as before, eerily perfect. The dolls on the shelves seemed to watch them as they stepped inside, their painted smiles cold and cruel. "What are we even looking for?" Jack asked, his voice hushed. Aaron pointed to the bed. "The floor. The notes warned us not to disturb what's beneath it." Jack sighed, his knuckles white around the crowbar. "This is a bad idea." "I know," Aaron said. "But we don't have a choice." They moved the bed aside, revealing a patch of floorboards that didn't match the rest. The wood was newer, nailed down hastily, as if someone had sealed something inside in a desperate rush. Jack pried up the first board. The nails screeched against the wood, the sound setting Aaron's teeth on edge. The air grew colder with each board they removed, and that faint, sickly sweet smell from before returned, stronger now. Finally, the last board came loose, revealing a shallow cavity. Inside was a small wooden box, its surface warped and blackened with age. Jack reached for it, but Aaron grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking. "What if we're making it worse?" Jack hesitated, his hand hovering over the box. "If we don't figure out what this is, we're not getting out of here." He lifted the box carefully, holding it between them. The wood was damp and cold, and something shifted inside, faintly rattling. Jack opened it. Inside was a small porcelain doll, its face cracked and yellowed. Its eyes were hollow, empty pits, and its tiny dress was stained with something dark. Beneath the doll lay a folded piece of paper, brittle and yellowed with age. Aaron unfolded it with trembling hands. The writing was hurried, almost frantic. "It won't stop. We tried to seal it, but it always comes back. If you're reading this, it's too late. Don't listen to her. Don't trust her. Don't let her out." As the last word left Aaron's lips, a loud bang erupted from the floor beneath them, followed by a low, guttural groan. The house shuddered violently, the walls trembling as if something massive were moving beneath them. The sound of splintering wood echoed from below, and the air filled with a deep, resonant laugh, low and mocking. "What did we do?" Aaron whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Jack grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. "We need to get out, now." But as they turned, the dolls on the shelves began to move. Their heads turned in unison, their painted eyes locking onto Aaron and Jack. One by one, they began to fall, their porcelain bodies shattering against the floor. But their laughter, high-pitched and cruel, continued to echo through the room. From the hole in the floor, a pale, clawed hand emerged, gripping the edge of the wood. Aaron froze, her breath caught in her throat as the hand, thin, pale, and impossibly long, clawed its way up from the hole. Its fingers, tipped with black, jagged nails, dragged against the wood, leaving deep grooves. Jack yanked her arm, his voice cracking with panic. "Aaron, move." She stumbled backward as the creature pulled itself up. First came its head, a grotesque mockery of a child's face, porcelain pale with hollow, black eyes that seemed to devour the dim light. Its jaw hung slightly open, revealing crooked teeth and a deep, unnatural smile that stretched far too wide. Aaron couldn't look away as the creature unfolded itself, its body unnaturally long and twisted, as though it had been crammed into too small a space for too long. It crawled onto the floor, its limbs bending at horrific angles, its head cocking sharply as if studying them. "Why did you open the door?" it rasped, its voice soft and childlike but layered with something deeper, something ancient and malevolent. The floorboards groaned under its weight as it dragged itself toward them, its smile widening with every step. Jack swung the crowbar, but the creature darted sideways with inhuman speed, the motion so fluid it seemed to blur. It let out a high, chilling giggle that echoed through the room. "Run!" Jack yelled, grabbing Aaron by the wrist and pulling her out of the room. The attic felt suffocating, the air heavy and electric as the house groaned around them. They raced down the stairs, the creature's movements echoing behind them, scraping, clicking, giggling. "Where do we go?" Erin cried, her chest heaving with terror. Jack didn't answer. He kicked open the basement door, his desperation overriding logic. "We need to find the breaker box, see if there's a way to stop this thing." "That's insane!" Erin shouted, but Jack was already descending into the dark. The basement was freezing, the faint glow they'd seen earlier now pulsating stronger. Shadows writhed along the walls, moving independently of the faint light. Erin followed reluctantly, gripping the flashlight with white-knuckled hands. "What are we even looking for?" she whispered. Jack pointed to the far wall, where the breaker box sat open. The wires had been yanked free, hanging in a tangled mess. "Great," he muttered, his voice shaking. A noise came from behind them, a low, guttural groan. They turned slowly, the flashlight beam shaking as it landed on the creature at the base of the stairs. It grinned at them, its black eyes narrowing. "You can't leave," it said, dragging itself forward. "You woke me. Now we'll play." Jack swung the crowbar again, aiming for its head. The creature let out a screech, its limbs twisting unnaturally as it dodged the blow. In the chaos, Erin spotted something in the corner, a small trapdoor in the floor, slightly ajar. "Jack," she shouted, pointing to it. "There's something down there." Jack hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Go." They sprinted for the trapdoor as the creature lunged, its claws slicing through the air. Erin threw the door open, revealing a narrow tunnel beneath the house. The air was damp and foul, but it was their only option. They dropped into the tunnel, Jack slamming the trapdoor shut behind them. The creature's claws raked against the wood above them, its laughter muffled but still relentless. "What is this?" Erin gasped, her voice shaking as she shone the flashlight down the tunnel. The narrow space stretched into darkness, the dirt walls lined with strange, childlike drawings, crude images of twisted figures and clawed hands. "I don't know," Jack said, his voice strained. "But it has to lead somewhere. We just have to keep moving." They crawled through the tunnel, the dirt walls pressing in on them. Every sound, the scrape of their clothes, their labored breathing, seemed amplified in the suffocating silence. Then, from behind them, the laughter started again. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer, echoing through the narrow space. "It's coming," Erin whispered, her voice breaking. "Jack, it's coming." "Keep going," he urged, pushing her forward. The tunnel began to slope downward, the air growing colder with each step. The flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. Finally, they emerged into a larger chamber. The room was circular, its walls lined with ancient, crumbling bricks. In the center sat a small, stone altar, and on it was another box, identical to the one they'd found in the attic. Erin's stomach dropped. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I'm not touching that." "You have to," Jack said, his voice frantic. "Whatever this thing is, it's tied to these boxes. Maybe if we destroy it." A loud screech cut him off as the creature dropped into the chamber, its limbs contorted, its grin impossibly wide. "You can't stop me," it hissed, dragging itself toward them. "You woke me. Now you're mine." Jack grabbed the box, his hands shaking. "What do I do?" Erin stared at the creature, its black eyes glowing in the dim light. "Break it," she whispered. "Do it now." Jack raised the box over his head, but before he could smash it, the creature lunged. The creature moved with impossible speed, its clawed hand slamming into Jack's chest and sending him sprawling to the ground. The box slipped from his hands, clattering onto the stone floor. "No!" Erin screamed, lunging toward him. The creature turned its hollow, black eyes toward her, its grin splitting wider. "He can't save you," it rasped. "You opened the door. You broke the seal. And now, you belong to me." Erin's hands shook as she reached for the fallen box, the creature's laughter echoing through the chamber. Jack groaned, trying to crawl away, but the creature slammed its claws into the ground, blocking his path. "Erin," he gasped, his voice weak. "Don't let it win." Her gaze darted between the box and the creature. Every instinct screamed for her to run, to escape, but there was no way out. The tunnel had brought them here, and now this thing had trapped them. Her eyes fell on the altar, and suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The box. The warnings. The seal. This wasn't just a trap. It was a prison. The altar wasn't meant to contain something small. It was meant to bind something vast, ancient, and hungry. "You're tied to this, aren't you?" she said, her voice trembling but defiant. The creature tilted its head, its grin faltering for the first time. Erin grabbed the box and held it over the altar. "If I destroy this, what happens to you?" A guttural growl rumbled from the creature's chest, its form twisting and convulsing. "You'll only make it worse," it hissed, its voice a venomous snarl. "You'll unleash what lies beneath." Erin's hands tightened around the box. "You're lying." The creature lunged at her, its claws outstretched, but Jack threw himself between them, slamming the crowbar into its side. The creature screeched, its body collapsing into a writhing mass of shadow. "Do it!" Jack shouted, blood trickling from his mouth. "Destroy it, Erin." Erin didn't hesitate. She raised the box high and brought it crashing down onto the altar. The wood splintered with a deafening crack, and a blinding light erupted from within. The creature let out an ear-piercing wail, its form convulsing as it tried to retreat. The chamber shook violently, the walls splitting and crumbling as the light expanded, consuming everything. "You don't know what you've done," the creature screamed, its voice fractured and distorted. Erin shielded her eyes as the light engulfed the room, its intensity overwhelming. The last thing she saw was the creature dissolving into the air, its grin finally gone. When the light faded, Erin found herself lying on the ground, the chamber eerily silent. The altar was gone, replaced by a jagged hole in the earth. "Jack," she called out, her voice hoarse. She crawled toward him, finding him slumped against the wall, pale but alive. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice weak. "Is it gone?" Erin nodded, though she wasn't sure. The air felt lighter, less oppressive, but there was an unease that lingered, a sense that the house, the tunnel, and whatever had been beneath it were still watching, waiting. They climbed back through the tunnel, the house now eerily quiet. The oppressive energy was gone, but the silence felt fragile, like a thin layer of ice over deep, dark water. "We're leaving," Jack said as they reached the front door. This time, the knob turned easily, and the door swung open to reveal the cold, clear night. They stepped outside, their breaths visible in the chill air. But as they walked toward their car, Erin couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the attic window. Weeks later, the house was abandoned, left to decay. Locals spoke of strange lights and faint laughter coming from the property, but no one dared go inside. Erin and Jack moved far away, but Erin couldn't forget the childlike voice that had followed them, whispering in her dreams. "You woke me. You can't keep me locked away forever." And in the dead of night, sometimes, she swore she could hear it again.